Marcus had been invisible for so long that he barely noticed himself anymore. 3 years of sleeping under bridges and eating from dumpsters had a way of erasing a man's reflection. The city moved around him like water around a stone, people stepping aside without ever meeting his eyes. He had learned to accept this ghostly existence, this half-life where survival was the only goal that mattered. The cardboard sign he held each day told a story nobody wanted to read. His clothes, donated and worn thin, hung loose on a frame that had once been strong and capable. But that was before the factory closed, before his wife left, before the drinking started and the eviction notice came. Now, at 42 years old, Marcus existed in the margins of a world that had moved on without him. The November rain had been falling for hours, turning the downtown streets into rivers of gray. Marcus huddled beneath the awning of a closed electronics store, watching people rush past with umbrellas and briefcases, their lives contained and purposeful. His stomach growled with a familiar ache. He had not eaten since yesterday morning when someone had left half a sandwich on a park bench. The cold seeped through his jacket, a threadbare thing that did little against the biting wind. He pulled his knees to his chest and tried to remember what warmth felt like. The memory seemed impossibly distant, like something from another lifetime. That was when he saw it, a brown leather wallet lying in a puddle, just a few feet from where the crowd bottlenecked at the intersection. It must have slipped from someone's pocket in the rush. Marcus watched it for several minutes, waiting to see if anyone would notice. Turned back, searched their pockets in panic. Nobody did. The wallet sat there, getting soaked, while hundreds of feet passed within inches of it. He could feel his heart beginning to pound. His hands trembled, and not just from the cold. Marcus knew what he should do. He also knew what he could do. The difference between those two things had once been clear to him, back when he was a different person, back when he had a moral compass that pointed true north. But 3 years on the streets had taught him that survival sometimes required flexibility. That conscience was a luxury for people with full bellies and warm beds. He had seen other homeless people find lost wallets, lost phones, lost opportunities. They never returned them. Why would they? The world had given up on them long ago. Why should they care about the world's rules? He stood slowly, his joints aching from hours of sitting in the damp cold. The rain plastered his gray hair to his forehead. He walked toward the wallet with his heart hammering against his ribs. When he picked it up, the leather was cold and slick in his hands. He opened it carefully, as if it might explode. Inside, he found $300 in crisp 20s, several credit cards, a driver's license, and photographs. The license showed a young woman with kind eyes and a genuine smile. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She was 28 years old. In the photographs, she stood with an elderly woman who looked fragile and sick, the kind of sick that settles deep into bones and does not leave. Marcus stood there in the rain, water running down his face, staring at those photographs. $300 could feed him for weeks, could get him into a shelter for the winter, could buy him new shoes, a decent jacket, maybe even a cheap phone so he could start looking for work. It was more money than he had held in his hands in 3 years. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. All he had to do was walk away, put the wallet in his pocket, and disappear into the city's anonymous crowds. Nobody would ever know. Sarah Mitchell would cancel her cards, get a new license, and move on with her life. She would never know that a homeless man had held her future in his hands for a few brief moments. But Marcus kept staring at those photographs, at the sick woman, at Sarah's kind eyes. He thought about his own mother, who had died alone while he was too drunk to visit. He thought about the man he used to be, before the world broke him. He thought about the difference between surviving and living. And in that moment, standing in the freezing rain with salvation in his hands, Marcus made a choice that would change everything. Marcus stood outside the address on the driver's license for 20 minutes before finding the courage to approach. The apartment building loomed above him, clean and modern with a glass entrance and a security intercom. It was the kind of place where people like him were not welcome, where security guards asked questions and called police. He had walked 8 blocks through the rain to get here, clutching the wallet inside his jacket to keep it dry, arguing with himself the entire way. Even now, part of him whispered that he could still turn around, that he was a fool for giving up $300, that Sarah Mitchell would never know the difference. But he pressed the intercom button anyway. His finger left a dirty smudge on the polished metal. He waited, counting his heartbeats, ready to run if someone called him a thief or worse. The speaker crackled to life. A woman's voice, cautious and tired, asked who was there. Marcus cleared his throat. His voice came out rough and uncertain from disuse. He said he had found a wallet, that he wanted to return it. There was a long silence. He wondered if she had already disconnected, already decided he was trying to scam her. Then the door buzzed open. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt eternal. Marcus caught sight of himself in the mirrored walls and quickly looked away. He barely recognized the haggard face staring back, the hollow eyes and unkempt beard. He smelled like the streets, like rain and desperation. His shoes squeaked on the polished floor, leaving wet marks. When the elevator doors opened, Sarah Mitchell was already standing in her doorway, watching. She looked exactly like her photograph, but worry had carved lines around her eyes that the camera had not captured. She studied him carefully, taking in his appearance without judgment or fear, just observation. Marcus pulled the wallet from his jacket and held it out like an offering. His hand shook. Sarah took it slowly, opened it, checked the contents. Her eyes widened when she saw the cash still there. She looked up at him with an expression he could not quite read. Disbelief, maybe, or confusion. People like him were not supposed to return wallets full of cash. They were supposed to be the reason you clutched your belongings tighter when walking past. She asked him his name. He told her. She asked if he wanted to come inside. The question hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had invited him anywhere? Inside the apartment, everything was warm and clean and overwhelming. Sarah disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a towel, a glass of water, and a sandwich. She set them on the coffee table and told him to help himself. Marcus wanted to fall on the food like a starving animal, but he forced himself to eat slowly to maintain some dignity. Sarah sat across from him and explained that she had been frantic. Her grandmother was in hospice care. The wallet contained money for medications that insurance would not cover. She had retraced her steps 3 times, called every business on her route, filed a police report. She had given up hope of ever seeing it again. As Marcus ate, Sarah asked about his life, not in the pitying way strangers sometimes asked homeless people, as if they were exhibits in a zoo. She asked like she genuinely wanted to know. So he told her about the factory closure that put 300 people out of work overnight, about how his marriage crumbled under the stress, about the drinking that started as a way to numb the pain and ended as the only thing that mattered, about losing the apartment, the car, everything, about the 3 years that followed, each day bleeding into the next in an endless struggle just to survive. He told her things he had not spoken aloud in years. The words poured out of him like water from a broken dam. Sarah listened without interrupting, without judging. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made his throat tighten. She said that returning the wallet was the most honest thing anyone had done for her in years. That her grandmother always said you could judge a person's character by what they did when nobody was watching. That Marcus could have walked away, could have kept the money, and she would never have known. But he chose differently. She asked if he needed anything. A meal, some clothes, help finding a shelter. Marcus shook his head. He said seeing her get the wallet back was enough. It was a lie. He needed everything, but he had already taken too much of her time. He stood to leave, and Sarah stood with him. She walked him to the door, then hesitated. She asked if he would mind if she stayed in touch, if maybe she could help him somehow. Marcus did not understand. He had returned something that belonged to her. The transaction was complete. Why would someone like her want anything to do with someone like him? But he gave her a way to reach him, the name of the shelter where he sometimes stayed. As he walked back into the rain, the sandwich sitting warm in his stomach, Marcus felt something he had not felt in 3 years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was still a person who mattered. He did not know it yet, but everything had just begun to change. 2 days passed before Marcus saw Sarah again. He had almost convinced himself that their conversation had been a fevered dream, a momentary kindness that would evaporate like morning fog. People said things in the moment that they never followed through on. He knew that better than anyone. But on a gray Wednesday afternoon, as he sat on his usual corner holding his cardboard sign, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. Sarah walked toward him carrying 2 coffee cups and a paper bag. She sat down on the curb beside him, ignoring the stares of passing pedestrians, and handed him a cup. The coffee was hot and sweet and perfect. She had also brought sandwiches. They talked while they ate. Sarah told him about her grandmother, about how the hospice nurses said it would not be long now, about how hard it was watching someone you love fade away piece by piece. Marcus listened and shared his own stories of loss. They discovered they both loved old Western movies, both hated Brussels sprouts, both thought the city needed more trees. It was strange how normal it felt, sitting there on the sidewalk sharing a meal, as if the vast gulf between their circumstances could be bridged by a simple conversation. When Sarah stood to leave, she did something that shocked him. She offered him a job. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, owned a small convenience store 3 blocks away. Her usual stock clerk had quit without notice, leaving her desperate for help. Sarah had mentioned Marcus, had vouched for his character based on the returned wallet. Mrs. Chen was willing to give him a chance. The job paid minimum wage, included 1 meal per shift, and started immediately if he was interested. Marcus stared at her, unable to process what he was hearing. Nobody had offered him legitimate work in 3 years. He had applied to dozens of places, but nobody wanted to hire someone with no address, no phone, no recent work history. Nobody wanted to take a chance on someone who smelled like the streets. He wanted to say yes immediately, but doubt crept in like poison. What if he messed it up? What if he could not handle the responsibility after so long? What if his hands shook too badly from withdrawal or his back gave out from sleeping on concrete? What if Mrs. Chen took one look at him and changed her mind? Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. She told him that Mrs. Chen knew his situation, that she was a refugee who had rebuilt her life from nothing and believed in second chances, that all he had to do was show up and try. The words hung in the cold air between them. Show up and try. It sounded so simple. It sounded impossible. Marcus said yes. He said it before fear could change his mind. Sarah smiled, wrote down the store's address, and told him to come by tomorrow morning at 8. As she walked away, Marcus sat there holding the piece of paper like it was made of gold. A job. A real job. He could barely remember what that felt like. That night, he used some of the money he had begged that day to go to a laundromat. He washed his clothes in hot water, scrubbed himself as clean as he could manage in the public restroom. He found a pair of scissors and trimmed his beard, cut his hair as best he could without a mirror. When he looked at his reflection in the bathroom scratch surface, he saw someone who might, just possibly, be employable. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Mrs. Chen's store at 7:30. He was too nervous to be late. The small shop was wedged between a dry cleaner and a nail salon, its windows covered with faded advertisements for lottery tickets and cold drinks. Inside, Mrs. Chen was barely 5 feet tall with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked him up and down without speaking, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. She was going to tell him to leave. She was going to say this was a mistake. Instead, she handed him an apron and pointed to the stockroom. She told him to organize the shelves, rotate the old product to the front, and sweep the floor. Then she could show him how to work the register. The work was harder than he expected. His muscles, weakened from malnutrition and lack of use, screamed in protest as he lifted boxes and whole bags of merchandise. His back ached. His hands blistered. But he did not stop. He worked through the pain, through the doubt, through the moments when his body begged him to quit. Mrs. Chen watched him work with that same unreadable expression. At lunch, she brought him a bowl of hot soup and rice from her apartment upstairs. She did not make a big deal of it, just set it down and told him to take 30 minutes. The food was simple but delicious, and Marcus had to force himself not to cry at the kindness of it. By the end of the shift, every part of Marcus hurt. But it was a good hurt, a known hurt. Mrs. Chen paid him cash for the day's work. She said if he came back tomorrow and the day after, they could discuss making it regular. She asked if he needed anything. Marcus thought about asking for an advance, for help finding a place to stay, for any of 100 things he desperately needed. Instead, he just thanked her and promised to return. As he walked out into the evening air, money in his pocket from honest work, Marcus felt something shift inside him. It was small, fragile, barely there, but it was something he had not felt in 3 years. It was hope. For 3 weeks, Marcus showed up at Mrs. Chen's store every single day. He arrived early and stayed late. He learned the rhythm of the business, the regular customers, the way to stack shelves for maximum efficiency. Mrs. Chen paid him daily at first, understanding that he needed immediate access to money for food and shelter. He spent his nights at the downtown shelter when beds were available, and under his usual bridge when they were not. He stopped drinking completely, knowing that one slip could cost him everything. The work gave his day structure and meaning. For the first time in years, he went to sleep tired from honest labor instead of exhausted from despair. Sarah stopped by the store several times a week. Sometimes she bought things she clearly did not need, just to check on him. They talked during his breaks, and Marcus found himself looking forward to those conversations more than he wanted to admit. She told him about her job as a teacher, about the kids who drove her crazy and made her laugh in equal measure. She told him about her grandmother's good days and bad days, about the guilt she felt for sometimes wishing it would just be over. Marcus listened and offered what comfort he could. He understood about loving someone and watching them suffer, about the complicated grief that came before death. Then everything changed. Marcus arrived at work one morning to find Mrs. Chen's grandson Tommy behind the counter. Tommy was 19, full of easy confidence and casual cruelty. He looked Marcus up and down with undisguised contempt. He said his grandmother was getting too soft in her old age, hiring bums off the street, that the store was losing money and they needed to make changes, that Marcus's services were no longer required. The words hit like physical blows. Marcus tried to explain that he had been doing good work, that Mrs. Chen seemed satisfied. Tommy laughed. He said his grandmother felt sorry for Marcus, but pity was not a business plan. He told Marcus to leave before he called the cops. Marcus stood there, feeling the world tilt beneath his feet. 3 weeks of progress, of hope, of believing he might actually claw his way back to normal life, all crumbling to dust. He wanted to argue, to fight, to make Tommy understand. But he was so tired of fighting, so tired of having to prove he deserved basic human dignity. He removed his apron, set it on the counter with shaking hands, and walked out. The November air felt colder than ever. His feet carried him automatically back to his old corner, back to his cardboard sign, back to begging. It felt like defeat. It felt like destiny. The afternoon crawled by in a blur of rejection. People walked past without looking. Some dropped coins without breaking stride, a reflex of guilt that required no eye contact. Marcus sat there feeling hollowed out, empty of everything except a vast and terrible despair. He had allowed himself to hope. That was the mistake. Hope was dangerous for people like him. It was a luxury he could not afford. Better to accept the streets as permanent, to stop fighting against the current and just let it carry him away. By evening, he had made a decision. There was a liquor store 2 blocks away. He had enough money for a bottle, enough to make everything stop hurting for a few hours. He was walking toward the liquor store when his phone buzzed. Not his phone, exactly. Sarah had given him an old smartphone last week, insisted he take it so she could reach him. He had been afraid to use it, afraid he would break it or lose it or that someone would steal it. But now it buzzed in his pocket with a text message. Sarah asking if he was okay, asking if he wanted to grab coffee. Marcus stared at the message for a long time. He stood on the sidewalk with people flowing around him like water around a stone, the liquor store glowing warm and inviting ahead of him, and made a choice. He texted back, told her what happened. Within minutes, his phone rang. Sarah's voice was tight with anger. She asked where he was. When he told her, she said to stay there. She was coming. She arrived 15 minutes later, breathless from running. She listened to his story, her jaw clenched, then pulled out her phone and called Mrs. Chen. The conversation was brief and intense. When she hung up, Sarah told Marcus that Mrs. Chen had not fired him, that Tommy had acted without permission, that Mrs. Chen was furious and wanted Marcus back tomorrow morning, that Tommy would no longer be involved in store operations. Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. He tried to speak but could not find words. Sarah touched his arm gently. She said that setbacks were going to happen, that the road back was never straight, that what mattered was not falling down but choosing to get back up. She asked if he had eaten. When he shook his head, she took him to a diner and bought him dinner. They sat across from each other in a vinyl booth, and Sarah told him something she had been thinking about for weeks. Her grandmother had passed away 3 days ago, peacefully, in her sleep. The funeral was tomorrow, and when it was over, Sarah would have access to her grandmother's apartment, a small 1-bedroom that was rent-controlled and empty. She wanted Marcus to have it. Marcus could not process what Sarah was saying. The words made sense individually, but together seemed impossible. An apartment. A real apartment with walls and a door that locked and heat that worked. He started to refuse, to say it was too much, that he could not accept such charity. But Sarah cut him off. She said it was not charity. Her grandmother's dying wish had been for the apartment to go to someone who needed it, someone who would appreciate it. The building required someone to be living there to maintain the rent control. If it sat empty, the landlord would jack up the price and Sarah could not afford market rate. She needed someone trustworthy, someone with character, someone like the man who had returned a wallet full of cash when he had every reason not to. There were conditions. Marcus had to keep working, had to stay sober, had to maintain the place. Sarah would check in regularly. If he fell back into old patterns, the deal was off. Marcus understood. These were not unreasonable terms. They were actually a gift, a structure to help him succeed rather than fail. He agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah smiled, looking exhausted and sad and hopeful all at once. She said they could start moving him in after the funeral, that she had some of her grandmother's old furniture he could use, that it would be okay, that everything was going to be okay. The funeral was small and beautiful. Sarah had invited Marcus, and he sat in the back of the chapel wearing clothes she had helped him pick out from a thrift store. He listened to people talk about a woman he had never met but felt he knew through Sarah's stories. A refugee who had survived war and loss and rebuilt her life through sheer determination. A woman who believed in second chances. Marcus thought about his own second chance, about the chain of events that started with a wallet in a puddle. He thought about how close he had come to walking past it, to keeping the money, to staying invisible. How different everything would be if he had made a different choice in that moment. After the service, Sarah took him to the apartment. It was small, just one bedroom and a tiny kitchen and a bathroom with a shower that worked. But to Marcus, it looked like a palace. The furniture was old but clean. The radiator clanked and hissed but produced genuine heat. There were windows with curtains and a bed with sheets and a refrigerator that hummed quietly. Sarah handed him the keys. She told him it was his now, that she trusted him with it. Marcus closed his hand around the keys, metal warm against his palm, and felt something break open inside his chest. That night, Marcus took his first shower in 3 years. He stood under the hot water until it ran cold, scrubbing away layers of grime and shame and despair. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror afterward and barely recognized the face staring back. It was still his face, still marked by years of hardship. But something had changed behind the eyes. Something had rekindled. He climbed into bed between clean sheets and lay there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the building, the radiator, the distant traffic. He thought about Mrs. Chen and the job waiting for him in the morning, about Sarah and her impossible kindness, about choices and consequences and second chances. Marcus returned to work the next morning and poured everything into it. Mrs. Chen welcomed him back warmly, apologized for her grandson's behavior. Over the following weeks, she taught him more about the business, let him handle ordering and inventory, increase his hours and his pay. He proved himself reliable, hardworking, honest. Regular customers began to recognize him, to greet him by name. He started to feel less like a ghost and more like a person again. He opened a bank account, got a library card, started talking to a counselor at a free clinic about the trauma of homelessness and the drinking that had led to it. Sarah continued to check in, but their relationship evolved. They were no longer helper and helped. They had become genuine friends. She brought her struggles to him now, her grief over losing her grandmother, her stress from work. Marcus listened and offered support, grateful to finally have something to give back. They went to movies together, shared meals, talked for hours about everything and nothing. Marcus felt his world expanding from mere survival to actually living. He started making plans beyond the next day or week. Started thinking about the future as something that might hold possibility instead of just more struggle. 6 months after finding the wallet, Marcus stood in his apartment and took stock of his life. He had steady work, a safe place to sleep, food in his refrigerator, a friend who had saved him by letting him save himself. He thought about the man he had been, sitting in that rain with $300 in his hands, about how easy it would have been to make a different choice. about how that single decision had led to everything that came after. He understood now that returning the wallet was not really about Sarah or the money. It was about who he wanted to be, about refusing to let circumstances define his character, about choosing integrity even when survival hung in the balance. Marcus still saw people living on the streets. He could not walk past them anymore without stopping, without offering what he could. Money when he had it. Food. Conversation. Hope. He told them about the wallet. About Sarah. About second chances. Some listened. Some did not. Marcus understood. He had been there. He knew that hope was hard to accept when you were drowning. But he kept trying anyway. Kept offering a hand to pull others up the way Sarah had pulled him. The apartment was home now. Marcus had added touches of himself. A plant on the windowsill. Pictures of mountains he wanted to visit someday. Books from the library. On hard mornings when the memories of those 3 years threatened to overwhelm him, he would hold the apartment keys in his hand and remember that he was no longer invisible, that he mattered, that a single choice made on a rainy afternoon had changed everything. He had returned a wallet and found so much more than money. He had found his way back to himself. He had found home.